One of the most underrated characters in all of Genshin Impact is getting her first rerun in just a few days. And as the certified #1 Clorinde defender, I will be answering all your most burning questions regarding Clorinde's place in the meta, her different builds and teams, to help you decide if you should get her and how to make the most out of her if you do. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. This video is sponsored by Marvel Strike Force, a squad-based RPG where you build Marvel teams and battle the most iconic enemies. New players can unlock up to 17 characters in just the first 30 days, including Spider-Man, Deadpool, Thor, and more. I've only been playing for 2 days and I've already unlocked 13. Use my link in the description or scan my QR code to download the game for free and unlock free characters. There's also 2 limited time characters releasing during this month, Jean Grey and Hercules. You can also unlock characters and costumes from Marvel movies, TV shows, comics, and more. Celebrate the holiday season and use the promo code DEC24 to unlock What If characters Captain Carter, Star-Lord T'Challa, and Strange Heartless. My personal favorite character is Black Widow. She turns invisible and can't be hit by the enemies, and I have really enjoyed pulling out the game during the commercial breaks while watching TV. I just defeated Ronin. Get wrecked. The game is really nice for some casual auto battle fun while also having a ton of depth and constantly evolving meta to sink your teeth into. Marvel Strike Force is absolutely free. Don't forget to check my link and redeem the code for exclusive offers for my channel viewers. And if the game looks interesting to you, giving it a download really helps me and the channel out. Thanks once again to Marvel Strike Force for sponsoring this video. I think we have over 80 questions here. Some of them might overlap, and then I'll skip them, but I've already filtered them out into different categories: meta, wishes and pull value, teams, build, and general, and you can skip to the different timestamps below. Why do you think she's better than Sino? In Abyss, Sino doesn't really have energy issues, and he has good IR with Sing Cho. She does more damage than Sino. Yep. Since Fischl's A4 has a 0.5 second cooldown, doesn't that mean that Aggravate Clorinde would get just about as much value out of her as Aggravate Keqing would or other fast electro appliers? The main value of Clorinde over other electro characters is she does quite a bit more damage. While often other electro appliers are on field driving Fischl for 50% or more of their DPS, Clorinde takes on more of the damage profile and just does a lot more damage by herself. Of course, Fischl is still very good in her teams, but isn't always even the best in slot, at least if you have C6 Ororon, or sometimes a really good build can prefer Kujo Sara. Yai is also fairly similar. I still prefer Fischl overall, but Fischl is not what carries Clorinde's Aggravate teams, it is Clorinde herself. People say she sucks compared to Neuvillette and Arlecchino. Is that true? How does she compare to other Electro DPS? She does not suck compared to Neuvillette and Arlecchino. They both did get quite a buff with Citlali. I would say Arlecchino's Citlali teams especially are definitely a cut above, although Clorinde did also get a buff with Moika teams, in particular slotting in Moika into her overload teams. Overall, Neuvillette and Arlecchino are definitely better, but it's not as different as you might think. In the right circumstance, Clorinde's incredible multi-wave with her C6 Chevreuse teams or her Shalon and Aggravate teams can perform very, very well. Sometimes in the right circumstance, even getting my fastest clear times out of all these characters. So yeah, overall, she's a bit of a step down from Neuvillette and Arlecchino, but it's definitely not as far down as you might think. How does she compare to other Electro DPS? In my opinion, she is clear-cut the best. There is an argument to be made for Raiden because she is a lot easier to play in any of Raiden's teams because she has infinite interruption resistance. For Raiden to be comparable, you really have to fine-tune your ER requirements to get max damage out of Yelan and Farina. Personally, if I were to go for a consistent and fast clear, Constellation 0 to Constellation 0, I would choose a Clorinde team, whether it be C6 Chevreuse with Toma or Shalon and Aggravate with Kirara, over any of Raiden's teams, but especially if you may have 5-star weapons for your Yelan, for your Farina, and you really have good artifacts for them, maybe even C1 Farina, then Raiden teams can make more sense. But overall, I personally get very consistently faster clears with Clorinde than Raiden. I would say they're pretty close, but Clorinde is definitely better. And versus other Electro DPS, such as Yai, I would say she is a pretty solid upgrade overall. And same versus Sino, and even more so versus Keqing. I'd say the difference for Clorinde being better than Raiden when it comes to overload, especially aggravate, it's not even close, because Raiden's all about doing big hits, where Clorinde does a ton of tiny hits. So she gets more buffs from aggravate. But for overload, where you notice the difference the most is in multi-wave, and when the enemies are like a little bit spread out. Clorinde's range really allows her to close the gap to new enemies much faster than dashing with Raiden, where you lose a lot of DPS. So I think it's both just more damage from Clorinde as well as her mobility that makes her better. I do think Clorinde is definitively better, but I don't think if you have Raiden that you need to feel like you need to upgrade to Clorinde. I think Raiden is still quite solid. You're better off just min-maxing your supports that Raiden is driving, because there's a lot of damage that can improve there as well. Do you really need her C1 to be an S+ DPS? I want her to achieve great performance. I think right now she's just a step down from the other DPSs. If you have C1, sure, that could, she gets a lot out of her C1, that could make an argument for her to be an S+ DPS. But great performance, she has great performance at C0, especially if you're able to get her signature weapon or her Constellation 1. But that's most DPSs these days. They get a lot of value from their signature or their Constellation 1. She doesn't feel lacking. There's lots of DPS that feel a bit lacking compared to Neuvillette, Arlecchino, Moika. Well, every DPS feels like they lack compared to Moika and Neuvillette. But Clorinde always feels like she gets the job done. She never disappoints. So I don't think you need a C1 to achieve great performance, but S+ DPS, yeah, I probably need C1 for S+, whatever that means. How often do you think Clorinde is competitive enough as a DPS like Neuvillette, Moika, and Allocation? I think in AoE multi-wave scenarios, Clorinde can feel just as good, if not even better, than those characters. But more often than not, she's a step down, but she's still competitive enough. Who's better damage dealer at C0, R0, Clorinde or Alhaitham? It's Clorinde. As long as you have Clorinde's good teams. In particular, what comes to mind for me are the Shenhe Aggravate or C6 Chevreuse. I definitely think that Clorinde is noticeably better. Is Electros a main DPS element mid? I think that Clorinde, specifically with Aggravate and C6 Chevreuse, it's not, I wouldn't say it's mid. I would say overall Electro as a main DPS element is mid, but Clorinde has enough going for her that she's more high tier than mid. I've noticed that Clorinde has had a mixed reception regarding how good she is to have on your account. For me, she looks pretty and the playstyle is extremely stylized, but from a meta standpoint, what are some of the criteria according to you that has to be met in order to justify pulling for her? I think one of the most account value, I wouldn't say meta, because if you're going meta, I don't really recommend pulling DPS for meta, because always chasing the meta isn't a very good idea. But in terms of account value, her being so good with Chevreuse teams allows you to free up Citlali, Shenhe, Moika, Kazuha. Well, Moika you kind of want to use with her, but you can also use Toma for pretty much, for like still very good and comfy results. But she frees up Farina, Kazuha, Bennett, Shenhe, most of the really broken supports, allowing your second team to be very easy to build, and you can throw all your broken supports on the other side, which is really, really nice. So I'd say that's a really good positive for Clorinde, and even if you use Aggravate, you're still freeing up Farina, Citlali, Bennett, etc. for the second side, so you have lots of good options. That's one of the biggest value things about Clorinde. I think she had a mixed reception, so I think she's fairly easy to justify pulling for, but I definitely would not recommend her from a meta perspective, but I would recommend her if you like her, if you find her fun and her playstyle fun. I definitely think you won't regret going for her, particularly if you enjoy her and her playstyle. Some people don't, and then I definitely don't recommend getting her. If you want just a meta character, then she's not your pick, but she's very good for people who like her. Should I pull her instead of Arlecchino? Depends what else you have. It depends which supports are more contested. If, say, you like them exactly the same, you find them both just as fun, it really depends on your other supports. Did you get Moika? In which case, definitely Clorinde is going to be better, both because you can use them together, or Moika and Arlecchino kind of want the same supports. So I would say it kind of depends. Do you already have a character that uses Bennett as your other carry? In which case, you know, Clorinde not needing Bennett is going to be pretty valuable. Other than that, Arlecchino is definitely generally a stronger pull, particularly if you have Citlali. If you don't have Citlali, they're quite a bit closer. But mostly you should just do both of their trials, see which one is more fun, which character you like overall better, and go for that one. Clorinde's my favorite character, and to me she's really strong, both Aggravate and Overload. Why do you think the community underrates her so much? I've seen many people say she's worse than Raiden or even the same level as Keqing, which is totally not true. She is way better than Keqing and definitely not worse than Raiden. I could see you arguing that maybe they're close to the same. I think the community underrates her because most people don't have C6 Chevreuse. Her aggravate is a bit annoying to play, so a lot of people ended up playing Quick Bloom, which is fine, but it's not her best team. She came out right after Arlecchino, so a lot of people spent their pulls on Arlecchino. I think a lot of people went for Thundering Fury, and I don't think that that artifact set really impresses too much. I think that her downtime is overrated, and it does make her fun for the overworld to have 2 skill durations, but as long as you're bursting every rotation, which you usually are, as long as you have a couple substats and you're using her with Fischl, you're bursting every rotation. And so in that case, her downtime really doesn't exist. So it's just much better to be using her Bond of Life set, which a lot of people didn't get. A lot of people might not be investing in her talents properly. And there's sort of like the if they're not the most broken character, then they're mid. So like if they're not as good as Arlecchino, Novelette, Moika, then they're mid. Whereas really, she's sort of at the higher end of all the other DPSs, except for the best 3 really. Plus people kind of want to people wanted to justify not pulling her, and she also got nerfed right at the end of the beta, and so that probably also really contributed into people thinking she's mid, because she would have been better if she wasn't nerfed, which, although true, the fact is she's great as is. How much of an upgrade is she over Keqing? Is the damage noticeably higher, or is it mostly from quality of life? The damage is very noticeably higher. Very noticeable. How does Yoimiya compare to C0 and C6 Fischl in Clorinde teams? Are there any of the teams where you think Miko outperforms Fischl? Miko can outperform Fischl in AoE content when her burst is valuable to do AoE damage. Otherwise, Miko C0 and C6 Fischl are pretty darn close. I find Fischl a little bit better, especially with the energy that she provides. But if you have Yoimiya built and you don't have C6 Fischl built, you can absolutely use Yoimiya and you're pretty much getting the same clear times. I have had Abyss runs where Yoimiya has done better. I would say in particular the overloaded teams, they're really quite close. Pull wishes and pull value. Is it worth going for her Sig if I already have Uraku and Shilonen to activate the passive in almost any team? Or is it better to go for cons and possibly C6 Chevreuse? For this particular banner, I would definitely go for C6 Chevreuse / Constellations, because getting C6 Chevreuse is such a big deal. Plus, Clorinde has an amazing C1. So this normally, I would say her signature is slightly better than her C1, but with Chevreuse being on her banner, definitely better to go for Chevreuse and C1. As a free-to-play who doesn't have a single extra copy of a limited 5-star or any signature weapon, how would you vertically invest in her? Definitely, again, C6 Chevreuse / her C1 / C2, whatever. If you get lucky and get C2, great. But definitely going all in to get as many copies of Chevreuse as possible is the way you want to go with this banner. How much of an upgrade is it to get the first refinement on Clorinde's weapon in comparison to refinements on other signature weapons? So with R2, you get 5% more crit damage and 12 damage percent. That's not bad, assuming you get all 3 stacks, which I think you should. I mean, 12% damage percent is not bad versus, for example, Moika's refinement, 5% crit damage, 7% attack. Oh, and then both of those are increased by 75%. So like 9% more crit damage, 8% more crit damage, and a bunch more attack. And versus Navia, 4.5 damage percent and 5% attack. As not an expert in weapon refinements, it seems like an above average refinement. I'd say the 5% crit damage is not really that noticeable, but when coupled with 16% damage bonus, I'd say that's somewhat noticeable. I would say, like you said, I'd accept any somewhat noticeable upgrade. I would say that 12% damage percent plus 5% crit damage is somewhat noticeable. Yeah. Is she a good pull even if you have Raiden? Only if you enjoy using her more, because Raiden is quite enjoyable to use. So you can always, invest in C2 Raiden. Like if you go from C0 Raiden to C2 Raiden, that costs you 2 5-stars. If you go from C0 Raiden to C1 Clorinde, which costs you 2 5-stars, I feel like you're going to be slightly better off with C1 Clorinde, but you could also go a different direction and get C1 Farina and then R1 Yelan, and that kind of spreads you out a bit more. You can also use both on either side of the Abyss. Raiden can use totally different supports than Clorinde. You can go, like I said, Farina, Yelan, Shilonen, while Clorinde can do your overloaded stuff. So I would say she can be a good pull even if you have Raiden, but I don't recommend just like jumping ship because Clorinde is stronger. If I have Moika, is Clorinde more worth it than Arlie? I want both, but I don't feel like I need Arlie as much as I need other element DPS. I would say yeah. She's a little, well, it depends. Arlecchino still is very good with overloaded teams. Clorinde doesn't have a monopoly over Chevreuse teams. But I would say that Arlecchino and Moika really both want Citlali, so getting Clorinde is a bit more different. It is more important, though, because you can still use Arlecchino and Moika on separate sides of the Abyss. It is still most important to pick who you like the playstyle more. And you can always use Clorinde with Moika, so that gives you some future options as well. I would say getting Citlali is the most important thing, and then after that, there are ways that you could justify either Arlecchino or Clorinde. Arlecchino being a little stronger, Clorinde using different supports. I'll talk about the Clorinde teams. I have a whole sheet that we'll go through in the team section. Most optimal vertical investments, I have her C0 and Haran. Should I go for weapon or C1 or Baiju, etc.? You definitely want to go for C6 Chevreuse first, which comes in this case, which comes with C1 usually, especially since you already have Haran. C1 is going to get you more than her weapon, considering you get more Chevreuse. I would never go for Baiju for Clorinde. I prefer Kirara. If you get C1, you still don't have C6 Chevreuse, then you want to go for C2. After you have C6 Chevreuse, C2 is still pretty nice over her weapon because you get that interruption resistance. So I would say it goes C6 Chevreuse number 1, and then it's sort of a toss-up. Since you already have Haran, I would say then C1, then C2, then R1. For people who don't have a 5-star weapon at all, it could be R1. Like once you get C6 Chevreuse, then R1 is better than C1 or C2. But C2 giving interruption resistance is quite nice. So you kind of can't go wrong with any of those options. Whose C1 is better, Clorinde or Arlecchino? Consider I'm going for Lanyan cons, and I have both Arlecchino and Clorinde at C0. Ooh. I think just make sure you get the one that you enjoy playing more. That's really what matters. I think Arlecchino's C1, like both of them have really amazing C1s. I think Arlecchino's is slightly better because it comes with that interruption resistance and stuff, but Clorinde's C1 is also one of the strongest constellations, so overall you really can't go wrong. If it was me, I'd be getting Clorinde because I love Clorinde, so you should go for who you like more. C1 Arlecchino or C2 Clorinde? My Arlecchino's on Jadewing Spear and Clorinde on Mistsplitter. Again, going for the one you enjoy playing more is the most important. C1 Arlecchino gives you that interruption resistance and a bunch of damage, and so does C2 Clorinde. If you play Arlecchino a lot, you're probably going to really love that C1, and if you play Clorinde a lot, you're probably going to really love that C2, especially if you've been, you know, trying to play her with Moika, for example, and you're missing out on the shield, then C2 could be really nice. Again, whichever one you play more and enjoy playing more. But Arlecchino is slightly better value, I think. Moika and Clorinde at C0, Arlecchino versus Clorinde C1. I don't think you really want to invest in two mega powerful power DPSs unless you're going to use Moika and Clorinde together, which is Clorinde's best team, but it does feel like a bit of a waste if you already have Citlali. Personally, now that I'm done testing Moika, I use Moika with my Clorinde, but that's just me. It's definitely not a meta recommendation or an abyss clearing strategy that I recommend. Yeah, see how, like, if you really enjoy your Clorinde, her C1 is really good and it gets you that Chevreuse, so that's really nice. And then Arlecchino, if you really love Arlecchino, having more characters is really fun. So it's totally up to you. Trying to get Chevreuse on the Clorinde Arlecchino banner. Oh, that's the same question. And in this one, it's basically go for that C6 Chevreuse, and after that, the world is your oyster. Teams. Okay, so for teams, I do want to quickly, before we answer the questions, go over my my testing results. So for a benchmark, my Raiden C2 team beat the Geo Bishop in 53 seconds, and my Clorinde teams, my Fischl, Moika, Chevreuse, was in 52. So yes, my C0 R1 Clorinde beat my C2 R1 Raiden. Granted, it is more consistent and easier to use Raiden because this Clorinde team does not have any interruption resistance, so you are playing like a madman, trying not to get hit by the Geo Bishop. When she was shielded, she did do better, but you get a shield boost from the Geo Bishop hitting your shield. I compared Toma team versus Moika team and got a pretty darn noticeable increase from the Moika team over the Toma team. And then Ororon was pretty close, considering my Ororon's only C1. When Ororon hits C6, this will be even better, and that could possibly be another upgrade, actually. So I'm pretty excited for Ororon C6 one day. Using Traveler was a bit worse. I used Raiden with Clorinde. Not a terrible time, I guess. This is C2 though. Yoimiya Muika Shev, a bit worse than Fischl, 5 seconds slower, and then Sara, a bit worse than Yai. My double Geo core, Yunjin or Chiori C1, both did really good. Keep in mind, again, this is shielded boost, but also Geo resist, so keep that in mind. The Geo Bishop does have Electro resist, by the way. So I think that's something worth keeping in mind, right? This is with 52 seconds with Electro resist. My Arlecchino gets 38 seconds. So this goes into the 40s with not having Electro resist for the Geo Bishop. And now we're not that far off from Arlecchino. And then my Moika did 37 seconds. So that's what I'm saying. Like, Clorinde's not that far off. My Aggravate, Fischl, Shalon, and Kirara, 46 seconds with the shield. Again, the shielded boost. Kujo Sara, 51 seconds. Electrocharge, a minute 14, a minute 5. Again, having C6 or Roran probably pushes this above Fischl. And then Quick Bloom, Frida, Nahida, Fischl, 104. All right, so now that we've gone over that, back to the teams. When you use Clorinde, people tend to say that Farina is really good with her, but one of her best comps is Chevreuse Overload. What's the difference between power between Clorinde Farina team versus Clorinde Chevreuse? And how strong is EM as a stat on her? Good questions. I find the Farina teams weaker. The Farina teams are good. Maybe if you have Farina C1, then that brings up the Farina team power. How strong is EM as a stat on her? It's pretty comparable to attack on Aggravate teams, but you don't need to specifically aim for EM. You talked about this briefly in your Moika video. What is the difference between Auroron and Fischl in the overloaded teams? Assuming that Auroron is C6, he also gives a really nice attack buff. My Auroron is only C1, but at C6, he not only does more personal damage, but he gives a 30% attack buff, which is really solid, and that buffs both Clorinde and Moika. And like you said, Moika can run Codex. Without C6, I do tend to prefer Fischl. With C6, I imagine I'll prefer Auroron, but we'll have to wait and see until I can get a C6 to say for absolute certain. Does rotation change with a healer like Shallonen because healing gives you Bond of Life, so be able to dash faster? Yeah, just watch your dash thing. And if you take a look at that as soon as it goes over half, you want to dash. So if it's going over half sooner, then you can dash sooner. I don't think Shallonen will affect it too much. With Nahida, it's impossible to swirl with Kazuo, and sometimes harder to trigger or crystallize with Shallonen, so who is alternative? Kirara C4 plus. You run around instructors, and if you happen to have Key of Kajna Suit, very good. Yeah, keep in mind for my Aggravate team here, this was instructors and Key of Kajna Suit. Sapwood is technically pretty close, but it's omega cringe to grab the Sapwood leaf. I hate it a lot. Is Moika part of her new best team? I mean, Moika can get Fighting Spirit from normal attack. Yes. Her, Clorinde, Auroron, and Chevreuse. Yeah, either Auroron if you have High Constellation, or Fischl, or Sara, I guess. Or Yai. And yes, I find that Moika does get enough Fighting Spirit to burst every rotation. So you can either run her on Scroll if no Auroron, or her signature if you have Auroron. If I'm using Kirara or a shielded character, then Finale of the Deep or Calamity of Ishu, or is there another better free-to-play option? Yeah, Calamity of Ishu is definitely her new best weapon. If you have a shielder on the team, keep in mind the crit rate increase. Don't overcap on crit, but it should be doable to not overcap on crit. 16% and then 40% damage bonus plus the attack percent. This is no slouch of a weapon. With a shielder, it's pretty close to Mistsplitter. Damage difference between C0 and C6 Chevreuse. You can check out my original Chevreuse video to see the damage. I don't know if Clorinde was even out then. I don't think so. Or maybe she was. But regardless, it is pretty noticeable. But C0 Chevreuse is still good, but it is pretty noticeable going to C6, so I highly recommend prioritizing C6 Chevreuse if you are a Clorinde enjoyer, unless, you know, you could be happy with the Kirara, Fischl, Shallonen one. Yeah. Some unusual teams. I'd be really curious if they're worth building or not. Yunjin, Jean, Flex, Farina. Jean C2 is definitely not worth it over something like Shallonen, especially on this team, but the Yunjin attack speed is good. Is relevant, and the buff is really nice. Sunfire comp, it's worse than Raiden. These teams have pretty high energy requirements, and Raiden reducing that is very nice. And there's not enough on this team that's really benefiting Clorinde in particular. She doesn't benefit from Bennett as much as Raiden does. And Sunfire overall like isn't as good as it used to be, and this is worse than the Raiden one. So also want to know if the upcoming 4-star Lanyan is a good pick for her. Should be. Lanyan should be quite good for Clorinde. She should make it easier to run Nahida. We're still a bit like the swirls are still going to be annoying, but at least you can run Nahida with instructors, and you can run, and Lanyan can use Thrilling Tales, so you can get, you know, sort of the best of all worlds with Nahida giving her burst, giving the instructors, or tenacity. Yeah, sorry, tenacity should be better, so you can still have the 5-star stats. It should be quite good. I'm looking forward to it. It could be her new best aggravate team, but I think I'll still prefer Xilonen. Ceiling team for Clorinde damage, it is 100% Mav, Auroran, C6, Chev C6. And then if you don't have Auroran C6 like I don't, you can use Fischl here. But Moika is definitely her new ceiling. I think Quick Bloom team is really overrated. What teams teammates would be getting to start with? Asking this is a free-to-play without many meta 5-star or C6 4-star characters. You should still have a Fischl. So something like Fischl, Dendro, Lanyan, because you can get Lanyan for free. That should be really solid. That should be a pretty solid free-to-play type team. You could use Dendro MC, right? Not ideal, but this is gonna have a shielder. It's gonna be pretty good. Is Overlord Clorinde worth it without a C6 Chevreuse? It depends what else you have. It could still be worth it, and it might not be. I would really prioritize getting C6 Chevreuse though. Overload and Aggravate are generally her best teams, but how close to your Quick Bloom and Taser teams are? I think this shows it. Double Geos seems better than Electrocharge and Quick Bloom. Although, yeah, it is the shielded boost. But it is the Geo Resist. But it is C1 Shiori. Lots to keep in mind. But overall, I would definitely say, I think for AoE, like, because this is a single target test, I think for AoE, Electrocharge is going to be pretty close. This might have the shielded boost too. Let me double check. No, it didn't. So I would say Overload with Mav greater than with Toma. But if you do have, again, C6 Auroran, then maybe Electrocharge could be better. Should be something like this. Number 1, Overload with Moika. 2, Overload with Toma equals Aggravate with Xilonen Kirara. This is slightly higher than Toma if you have the key, I think. And then Electrocharge C6 Auroran. Maybe it's, yeah, somewhere around there. So then that also would update the person who said that Farina has really good synergy. If you're using Electrocharge with C6 or Auroran, then that is something to keep in mind. Lanyan's gonna make interesting team furry, totally. Either the Electrocharge or the Aggravate. Lanyan is gonna be quite interesting. Most underrated team for her, I think I think all of her teams are underrated, but I think the most underrated, I think the Aggravate with Xilonen Kirara. Oh, I really should have posted my Aggravate with Kazuha here. What am I doing? Okay, so a little bit more testing. I just find that with Kazuha, I get worse clears. Of course, technically, on paper, it should be close. I've always gotten faster clears with Xilonen. I think in AoE, when the grouping matters, then they can even out. But otherwise, I just generally prefer Xilonen for Aggravate. I think the buffs lasting longer, being more flexible with when you use them, I think that's the biggest difference. And Clorinde has really good AoE, so you often don't need a ton of grouping. And lately in the Abyss, it hasn't mattered at all. But yeah. Do you think Pyro Traveler and Overload team would be solid because of Cinder City? It should be. It should be. Getting kind of worse times than with Toma. I don't know. I played it a lot and I couldn't get like a super good clear, but it should be. It's all right. How do you avoid being staggered without a shield, given the narrow timer on attack window is extremely rigid and doesn't allow you to dodge? Yeah, it's definitely the worst part about Clorinde. You either just have to anticipate attack patterns and kind of dash back or dash in when you know, depending on when you know they're going to move. It does get easier with time of playing her, but it is pretty cringe to do. Alternatively, you can use a shield. When attacking multiple enemies, say the Artifact Domain and Natlan, what's the best way to deal damage to all the enemies at once? I find the rate at which they die is often very equal, despite my efforts to reposition with the stabs. You basically want to be making sure that your guns are facing the enemies after you dash. So kind of being on the outside looking in, then dashing in and still being on the outside looking in, and then dash. Because the dash has a pretty large AoE, so it can be, it is a bit tricky for certain enemies. You also want to make sure that you apply Overloaded to all the enemies, because if Overload doesn't get applied on an enemy, then damage doesn't get dealt to them, which is why using Bennett is really annoying, and playing with a character that has better pyro AoE such as Toma or Moika is better. I have Kirara, but I want to use Nahida. I didn't pull an Archon just to bench her for some 4-star Dendro Nakomata. How much difference is there between Aggravate, Kirara, and Nahida? It's about the same. So you can see my Xilonen with Nahida was really, really close. The only difference is you don't have a shield with this one, right? So that's like the only problem with it. But other than that, it's good, and it could technically be better because you're getting more buffs from Nahida. I gave her Thrilling Tales on this one, and that's a more free-to-play option. So if my Kirara here was not the key, then she would not be getting 46. This would be probably closer to, I don't know, 48 or 50 or whatever. So yeah, you can absolutely use this instead. Is Chi-Chi actually usable with her? Don't lie. It's usable, but it's not good. Build. Is it okay to have her on EM Sands? I play her exclusively on Hyper Bloom since that's just one of my favorite reactions. Not sure if that's okay to play her optimally. That's fine. Especially for Hyper Bloom, EM Sands is fine. How much crit rate is advised? Should I put her on a crit rate or crit damage circlet? Kind of depends on your build. She does give herself 20% crit rate. I still have her on a crit rate helmet. It really depends on your substats. I want to optimize my second favorite DPS. Yeah. EM Sands is pretty close to attack Sands, like almost equal if you're using Aggravate, and it's a bit better if you're using Hyper Bloom, so that's fine. But the better the artifacts you have for your Clorinde, the more valuable attack Sands is, and the better Aggravate and especially Chivalrous gets. Especially, yeah, she has good multipliers. How big of a difference does the artifact set make? I noticed my 2-piece Hunter and 2-piece Attack does more damage than my 2-piece Gladiator. I think that the artifact difference is about 14%, which is 2 or 3 substats. And 14%, maybe it's either 10, 12, or 14, something like depending on which calc you look at. That's a pretty big difference. When you're all things considered, that's like the difference between a bunch of characters' best battle pass and their signature, right? That's a pretty big difference. You know, would you farm an artifact so that you can get, you know, an upgrade that's comparable to a signature weapon upgrade? I think that's worth it. A lot of constellations are less than that. I know hers is a bit more, but it's not that much more than 14%. So I would definitely farm her own artifact set. And I'd definitely I'd farm 4-piece Hunter. I think Thundering Fury is good, but I think it's bait, especially if you get C6 Shove. How does C6 Kara with Instructor and Sapwood Blade compare to Nahida? Overall, I find it a bit better. Damage-wise on paper should be pretty much the same. Out of Kazuha, Shallonen, and Lanyan, which support option is the best? I definitely prefer Shallonen. How much better is Calamity of Ushu compared to Finale of the Deep and Shielded teams? I think it's close to Mistsplitter, so like very close to just behind Mistsplitter, so it's a pretty significant upgrade. How much of an increase is the signature over Calamity of Ishu? Similarly, it's you know, pretty similar to upgrade over Mistsplitter, which is a decent upgrade. Going for Arlecchino C0 or her weapon. Her weapon is worth it, but you know, Chivalrous copies first. Is her artifact domain worth farming in the long run? Or Berserker, Thundering Fury are good enough? Thundering Fury is good enough, but I still think it's worth farming her artifact for the long run. I know people are saying that the domain is trash. It kind of is, but lots of domains are trash, and it's still 2-piece. So I don't mind having like getting the other set because it's 2-piece is attack, and there's still a bunch of characters that use 2-piece. Like Linny still uses 2-piece attack. 2-piece attack is pretty good, and you can always just be really picky with the artifacts you keep and strong box the others. And I mean, and eventually it will be added probably in the next for, you know, Shenhe, or what is it? What's the next one supposed to be? Nod Kral. Nod Kral is supposed to be the next region, so that will probably add her artifact set there. So I mean, you could wait till then, but you might as well farm. I don't know. I'm weird. I like farming artifacts. Hers is good. So I don't think it's ever worth farming Thundering Fury unless you play her mainly in the overworld and you think it's fun to have more skills. I think technically there's certain rotations you can do that make Thundering Fury almost as good as her signature, but her signature is the best regardless. You do weapon ranking. I think this is pretty good. So Absolution is number 1. Harangipaku Futsu is number 2. 5-star crit swords is number 3. Just behind that is the Ishu weapon. Then we've got the Black Sword, Freedom Sworn, Summit Shaper, Finale of the Deep, Lions Roar, Harbinger. So I generally think this ranking is pretty good. This is KeqingMains.com. How does ping affect her damage? Yes, her ping is really, really annoying. If you have over 250 ping, or I don't know if it's 200 or 250, but if you have over that, then you should not get her. Fortunately, you can test it in the trial run. Basically, you're seeing how many fully charged dashes you can do. Yeah, don't get her if you have super high ping. Can it be worked around by using healers like Shallonen and Chev? That's really interesting. I don't know. I don't have high enough ping to like test that or something, but that's interesting. Is her burst worth leveling and using? Oh my god. Her burst is very good. Her burst does very similar damage to Raiden's burst, but just in multiple targets. Yes, you should always level her burst and always use her burst. I know the consensus is that you shouldn't build ER for her, and while I sort of agree, the burst is part of filling the downtime of her skill. Her burst has a very long animation, and usually that's like not that great, but because you have 3 seconds of downtime in your skill with your, like, by the time you finish your skill, you use your supports, you go back onto her, you have 3 seconds of downtime. So if you don't have your burst to use, then that time is wasted. If you do have her burst, then you're only wasting 0.5 seconds. So overall, yes, her burst is very much worth leveling and using. Does she need to go sustainless to perform well? No. You have Shenhe, you have Kirara, you have Toma, and she performs well with all of them. Does her C1 coordinate attack trigger official C6? No, it does not. It is normal attack damage, but doesn't trigger a coordinate attack. It is a coordinate attack, I guess. How much worse a C6 card compared to Nahida and aggravate comps? Technically slightly worse, but overall better because it's a shield. I, in practice, get faster clear times with Kirara. When do you think she'll be power corrupt? If we're talking about a new Electro DPS being better than her, I would say it's a 50, every year is like a 50-50 because they can easily release another Electro DPS that's stronger than her in the next region probably, or even in Natlan. Like Ayansin could power creep her. I could see that. She comes out and then Ayansin comes out and Ayansin is like top of like, you know, Moika level. Who knows? That could happen. At the same time, they could release other Electro units that are worse than her, because I would say that she is better than, you know, characters like Kanich or Chaska, so they could easily release new characters that are worse than her. She's in a spot where she's strong enough that even if she gets power crept, she's still better than a lot of recent DPSs, so at least in my opinion. So I think that it could go either way, but even if it happens, you're fine. I agree, she's really good and fun to play. Bonus points that she doesn't require another 5-star or Bennett to work. Totally. In the Clorinde, Chev, Toma official SAR team, don't we have too much downtime because of Clorinde's skill cooldown? What do we do? There is 8 seconds. So at least 5 of those seconds are setting up your other supports, at least. And then the other 3 seconds are using Clorinde's burst. And then you have about time to do like 2 normal attacks before your skill is off cooldown again. So that's why I actually do think it is important to have a little bit of ER. And one of the reasons why I really like Fischl over Sara. Yeah. How much of a buff Pyro Trav brings to her Chev teams? The Toma has the shield buff and this doesn't. So it's like 10% worse than Moika. So I guess it's not that bad. It's pretty good. How much of importance is there to be another Electro character? Another Electro character really helps her energy regen, which helps for her burst, which is what I was just saying. New event weapon compared to other 4-star options. We just talked about that. Would you recommend team with Pyro Trav, Toma, and Chev? Just switch Pyro Trav for Fischl. Yeah. And then the new event weapon is awesome. Very, very good. Is Haran good as long as you don't overcap on crit? Yes, it's awesome. Is she as annoying to play at C0 as people say? The nice thing is if you find her annoying at C0 to play, which I don't personally, I like it, even though it can be kind of cringe sometimes, but you can always use Toma or Kirara, and sometimes if you're using Shenhe, you at least have 1 or 2 crystallizes. So no, I don't think she's as annoying to play, and there's better solutions. How have the reaction buffs helped her? How viable are Electrocharge teams now? Helped her a lot. So as I was saying before, I actually think upon re-inspecting this, I think her Electrocharge teams are actually really close, especially if you have C6 or Roran. They're actually really close to her overloaded teams, except for the Moika ones. They're about on the same level with Aggravate. And the reaction buffs also helped her using Toma. Toma used to be significantly worse than Xiangling, and you alternate using her burst and skill every other rotation for Xiangling. Well, you can use her skill every rotation, but you only use her burst every other rotation. But now Toma, with the EM buff, he can run some EM and his overloads do more damage, and that's noticeable. So yeah, overall quite viable. She now has lots of viable teams, which is awesome. I have Raiden not well built, just full EM. It's completely different than full EM, so you know, you can definitely justify that. Is she good pull value for 2025? I think she is just barely a top 5 DPS. Is that good pull value? That means there's 4 DPS that are better. Stay tuned for the next video for that to find out which one I think are better. So she's solid pull value, but mostly you get her because you like her. If I want to play Clorinde, yoimiya, Nahida Zhongli, that's going to be fine. If you really want to slay the abyss, it'd be nice to replace Zhongli with Shenhe, but this is going to be fine. As a fellow joystick player, to shoot her elemental skill AA, do you press three times like a manual gun, or keep pressing so she shoots on auto? I used to do the triple press, but I found I could squeeze out just a bit more damage by keeping it pressed in. So that's what I do now. I agree with this. The short uptime, if she gets knocked down, her short uptime really does hurt her times. For sure. That's probably her biggest issue. And the ping, yeah, that sucks. They should fix that. Did you take Raiden out to dinner before you broke up with her, or was it over the phone? We're kind of on an on again, off again thing. Raiden and I have E2 Raiden. I've been farming her domain for months and I still have the shittiest artifacts. Having a good set's more important than how good your character is. Kind of true, but yeah, that's why I'm not enthusiastic about pulling for Clorinde, although I love her character and playstyle. Both domains for her best on slot are not resin friendly on top of artifact RNG. How much do you agree with this? On what are your opinions? I don't mind artifact farming, but I think Raiden is especially awful to farm for. I guess the thing is, at least with Clorinde, she gives you 20% crit rate through her passive. So that's at least a little bit nicer than Raiden. Like quite a bit. Imagine if Raiden gave you 20% crit rate. It's not as nice as the newer sets, like this one giving you, what was it, 40% crit rate? Yeah, 40% crit rate, but 20% is still nothing to sneeze at. So if you decide to get her, you can at least take heart in that it's at least better than Raiden. Raiden is the worst character to farm for probably in the entire game because you need energy and tons of crit. It's awful. Do you like her more than Raiden, not for meta in general? The only thing that I like more about Raiden is like her lore of her like slicing open the entire mountain is like crazy awesome. But Clorinde never having lost a duel is pretty notable too. I like Raiden just a bit more lore-wise, like she lives in her own plane of existence. But then again, Clorinde like plays D&D and her dueling stuff is really cool. So character-wise, I think Raiden is maybe slightly better, but I like Clorinde's design a bit more. And she's more fun to play and she feels stronger. So overall, Clorinde has taken the lead for my favorite character in Genshin right now. Is she sometimes tricky to play at all? Like she have some mechanic while playing, so you have to watch out for timing for a Bond of Life, or her rotations tricky to play. I think her rotations, especially with Shev, are easy. The Bond of Life thing, you just have to watch the bar for when it just goes over half and then you use her skill. And it's in a rhythm, so you can get the hang of it. How much time did it take you to master rotations? She's tricky to play if you don't use a shield. If you use Toma or Kirara, then she's brain dead easy. I thought Raiden is her main and or Chiori. Yeah, I think it's, this is my previous video. I think it's Clorinde, Raiden, Chiori, Mualani, Chiori, Yoimiya. I think these are my top 5 personal favorites. Oh, Shenhe. If you include how they are to play, now that I have C1 Chiori, I like her more as well. Something like this. These are my 6 favorite characters. Yeah. Raiden Hypercarry, even the C2 R1 is bad right now. I can't clear anything. Try get yourself a Chevreuse, and then if not, use her with Farina, Yulan, Shalonen. But Chevreuse should be pretty easy to clear everything. Very easy. I don't like her previous hypercarry team very much anymore. I like the Kazuha stuff. What do you love so much about her? I think her design, her playstyle, her burst animation, her personality, and she's quite strong. She feel like you can feel the power, particularly either with the Shalonen Aggravate or the Chevreuse. And that is all. Thanks again to Marvel Strike Force for sponsoring the video. Check out the link down below, and also check out my Clorinde testing sheet down below as well. Thanks so much. Bye for now.